What happens when the person everyone underestimates becomes the only one who can save a life that matters to national security? In the sterile corridors of St. Mary's General Hospital, whispers followed Sarah Chen like shadows. The other nurses called her the ghost behind her back, not because she was scary, but because she moved through her shifts so quietly that patients often didn't realize she was there until they felt the gentle touch of her hand checking their pulse or adjusting their medication. While her colleagues chatted loudly at the nurses' station, gossiped during breaks, and complained about difficult patients, Sarah simply did her job with a precision that made some uncomfortable. Her silence wasn't born from shyness or incompetence, it was the careful, measured quiet of someone who had learned that words could be weapons, and she had seen enough damage for one lifetime. But, on one ordinary Tuesday morning, when the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the shuffle of medical staff created the usual symphony of hospital life, everything would change. A phone call would shatter the routine, a helicopter would thunder overhead, and Sarah's carefully guarded past would collide with a present that demanded she speak up not just to save a life, but to save the life of someone whose survival could determine the fate of a classified mission that had gone terribly wrong. The same colleagues who had dismissed her, laughed at her methods, and questioned her competence would soon discover that the quiet nurse they had overlooked possessed skills that no medical school could teach, knowledge that couldn't be found in any textbook, and a story that would redefine everything they thought they knew about healing, heroism, and the true meaning of saving lives. Sarah Chen adjusted the 4-drip for the elderly man in room 304, her movements precise and fluid like water flowing around stones. The patient smiled at her, but she only nodded in return, checking his chart one final time before moving to the next room. Behind her, she could hear the familiar sounds of her colleagues gathering around the central nurses' station, their voices carrying the latest hospital gossip mixed with complaints about their workload. "Did you see how she handled the cardiac patient yesterday?" Linda Morrison's voice cut through the chatter. Linda was the head nurse on the day shift, a woman who had worked at St. Mary's General for 15 years and believed that experience gave her the right to judge everyone else's methods. No reassurance, no small talk, just checked vitals and left. The poor man probably thought he was dying. "That's just how she is," replied Janet, a younger nurse who had started working there 6 months ago. "I tried talking to her during my first week, thought maybe she was shy. She just stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language." Sarah continued down the hallway, her soft-soled shoes making no sound against the polished linoleum. She had heard these conversations countless times over the past 3 years since she started working at St. Mary's. The whispers, the sideways glances, the questions about why she never joined them for lunch or participated in their birthday celebrations. They saw her silence as coldness, her efficiency as lack of empathy. What they didn't understand was that her quietness came from a place much deeper than shyness or antisocial behavior. Dr. Richard Hayes emerged from room 308, nearly colliding with Sarah as she approached with medications for his patient. He was a young resident, fresh from medical school and full of the confidence that came with textbook knowledge but limited real-world experience. His eyes lit up when he saw her, but not with the warmth one might expect. "Ah, the mysterious Sarah," he said, his tone carrying a hint of mockery that made several nearby staff members turn to watch. "I was just telling Mrs. Patterson about her surgery tomorrow. Perhaps you could add some human warmth to the conversation? You know, actually talk to the patients?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes steady and unreadable. Without saying a word, she handed him the medication chart, pointed to a specific notation she had made, and waited. Dr. Hayes glanced down, his confident expression faltering slightly as he read her careful handwriting detailing an important drug interaction he had missed in his initial prescription. He started, then cleared his throat. "Thank you. I'll adjust the dosage." Sarah nodded once and continued to Mrs. Patterson's room. The elderly woman was lying in bed, staring out the window with the kind of distant fear that comes before major surgery. When Sarah entered, Mrs. Patterson turned toward her with eyes that held questions she was afraid to ask. Without speaking, Sarah approached the bed and began her routine checks. But, as she took Mrs. Patterson's blood pressure, she noticed the woman's hands were trembling slightly. Sarah glanced at the patient's face and saw the telltale signs of suppressed panic, the rapid breathing, the darting eyes, the way she gripped the bed sheets. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. Her usual protocol was simple: complete the medical tasks, ensure everything was properly documented, move to the next patient. Speaking wasn't part of the routine she had carefully constructed to protect herself. But something in Mrs. Patterson's expression, a vulnerability that reminded her of another face, from another time, made her pause. "The surgeon tomorrow," Sarah said quietly, her voice so soft that Mrs. Patterson had to lean forward to hear her. "Dr. Martinez. She has performed this procedure over 300 times. Her success rate is 97%. Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened, not just at the information, but at the fact that Sarah had spoken at all. "Really?" Sarah nodded, then did something she rarely allowed herself to do. She sat down in the chair beside the bed, her movement careful and deliberate. "I was in the operating room with Dr. Martinez last month for a similar case. The patient was 83 years old, had complications that made the surgery more difficult than yours will be. She handled every challenge perfectly." "You were in the operating room?" Mrs. Patterson asked, curiosity replacing some of the fear in her voice. Sarah realized she had said too much, revealed more than her carefully constructed persona allowed. She stood up quickly, checking her watch. "Your pre-surgery instructions are on the table. Follow them exactly. Dr. Martinez will see you in the morning." As she moved toward the door, Mrs. Patterson called after her. "Thank you, dear. That helped more than you know." Sarah paused at the doorway but didn't turn around. She simply nodded and stepped into the hallway, where she nearly walked directly into Linda Morrison, who had been standing just outside the room. Well, Linda said, crossing her arms. "So she does talk. I was beginning to wonder if you were mute, Sarah. Though I have to say, telling patients about success rates and surgical statistics isn't really our job. That's what the doctors are for." Mrs. Patterson was scared, Sarah replied, her voice returning to its usual quiet tone. Of course she was scared. She's having surgery. But we have protocols for a reason. Comforting patients is one thing, but providing medical details about procedures and success rates? That could get you in trouble if you give someone wrong information. Sarah looked at Linda for a moment, then simply walked away. She had learned long ago that explaining herself rarely changed anything, and often made situations worse. Better to stay quiet, do her job, and avoid drawing attention to the skills and knowledge she possessed that went far beyond what her nursing degree suggested. The rest of her shift passed without incident. She administered medications, checked vitals, helped with patient transfers, and documented everything with the meticulous accuracy that even her critics couldn't fault. As the evening shift arrived, Sarah gathered her belongings from her locker and prepared to leave, just as she did every day. But, as she walked through the hospital lobby toward the parking garage, she passed by the small memorial wall that honored hospital staff who had died in service. Her steps slowed as she approached one particular photo, a young man in military fatigues with a bright smile and kind eyes. The nameplate read Lieutenant Michael Chen, U.S. Navy Hospital Corpsman, died in service, Afghanistan. Sarah touched the frame gently, a gesture that had become routine over the years. Mike had been her younger brother, and his death had changed everything about who she was and who she had chosen to become. The quiet, unremarkable nurse that her colleagues saw was a carefully constructed identity, built to hide the person she had been before the phone call that shattered her world, before the funeral with military honors, before she decided that drawing attention to herself was too dangerous for everyone involved. What her colleagues didn't know was that before nursing school, Sarah had spent 4 years as a Navy hospital corpsman herself, trained in advanced trauma medicine and battlefield surgery techniques. She had served alongside some of the most elite medical teams in the military, had treated injuries that most civilian nurses would never encounter, and had been personally trained by surgeons who operated under the most extreme conditions imaginable. But that life had ended the day Mike died, when she realized that the skills she possessed made her valuable to people who operated in dangerous shadows, and that being valuable to such people meant putting everyone she cared about at risk. So she had left that world behind, taken her discharge, and built a new identity as an ordinary nurse in an ordinary hospital where no one asked questions about her past and no one expected more from her than basic competency. As she drove home to her small apartment, Sarah allowed herself to wonder, as she did most evenings, whether she had made the right choice. The work at St. Mary's was meaningful in its own way, but it felt like using a precision instrument to pound nails, functional, but wasteful of the tool's true capabilities. She helped people, yes, but she knew she was capable of helping them in ways that her current role would never allow. Her apartment was sparse and functional, decorated with only the essentials and a few carefully chosen mementos from her military service that she kept in a locked drawer. She prepared a simple dinner, ate while reading medical journals to stay current with developments in trauma medicine, and went to bed early. Tomorrow would be another day of routine, another day of being underestimated and overlooked, another day of using only a fraction of her abilities. What Sarah didn't know as she drifted off to sleep was that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, a phone call would shatter the careful routine she had built, and the past she had worked so hard to leave behind would come crashing back into her present. Tomorrow, the skill she had hidden would become the only thing standing between life and death for someone whose survival mattered more than she could imagine. In the pre-dawn darkness of her apartment, Sarah slept peacefully for the last time in what would be a very long time. The quiet nurse that St. Mary's Hospital knew was about to disappear, and in her place would emerge someone that even she had almost forgotten existed, someone whose silence came not from weakness or antisocial behavior, but from the kind of strength that only developed under the most extreme circumstances, in places where speaking the wrong word at the wrong time could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The transformation would begin with the sound of her phone ringing at exactly 3:47 a.m., and, by the time the sun rose, everyone at St. Mary's General Hospital would understand that they had never really known Sarah Chen at all. The phone's shrill ring cut through the pre-dawn silence like a blade. Sarah's eyes opened immediately, her body shifting from deep sleep to complete alertness in the span of a heartbeat, a skill that civilian life hadn't managed to erase despite 3 years of trying. The clock showed 3:47 a.m., and she knew without looking at the caller ID that this wasn't a routine call. "Sarah Chen," she answered, her voice clear and steady despite having been asleep moments before. "Dove, this is Control." The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and used a call sign she hadn't heard in over 3 years. "We have a situation that requires your immediate assistance." Sarah's blood ran cold. Control was the operations center for a classified medical unit that officially didn't exist, one that provided emergency trauma support for special operations teams when conventional medical facilities weren't an option. Hearing that voice meant something had gone very wrong, and someone with security clearance high enough to access her current location needed help that only she could provide. "I'm no longer active duty," Sarah said carefully, her mind already shifting into the analytical mode that had kept her alive during her military service. "My clearance has been inactive for 3 years. Your clearance was reactivated 40 minutes ago under Emergency Protocol 7. A Navy SEAL team encountered complications during a classified operation. The team leader is critically wounded and requires immediate surgical intervention that cannot be provided at any standard medical facility due to the classified nature of his injuries and the foreign materials involved." Sarah was already getting out of bed, her body moving with automatic efficiency while her mind processed the implications. Emergency Protocol 7 meant a situation so sensitive that standard military medical facilities couldn't be used either because the injuries would reveal classified technology or because the patient possessed information so vital that exposure to standard medical personnel could compromise national security. "Where?" she asked, moving toward her closet where her emergency bag had remained packed and ready for 3 years, despite her determination never to need it again. "St. Mary's General Hospital. The patient is being transferred there by special medical helicopter in approximately 20 minutes. You are the only person within 100 miles with both the medical clearance and surgical experience necessary to save his life." Sarah paused, her hand on the emergency bag. "St. Mary's? That's where I work. We know." The selection of that facility was not coincidental. "You will be contacted by the helicopter crew upon arrival. The cover story is a civilian trauma case involving experimental medical implants that require specialized knowledge to remove safely. Your colleagues will believe you are consulting on the case due to your experience with advanced surgical techniques." "What kind of foreign materials are we talking about?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer would determine whether this was a routine extraction or something far more dangerous. Experimental enemy surveillance technology that has been surgically implanted in the patient's torso. The devices are designed to self-destruct if removal is attempted without proper protocols. Failure to remove them successfully will result in the death of the patient and exposure of classified information that could compromise ongoing operations. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her decision settling around her like an old, familiar uniform. She had left this world precisely because of moments like this, moments when the skills she possessed made her indispensable, when other people's lives depended on her ability to perform under impossible circumstances, when failure meant consequences that extended far beyond a single patient. "I need guarantees," she said finally. "Full medical authority over the case, no interference from hospital administration, and complete control over who has access to the patient during the procedure." "Granted. A federal medical order is already being transmitted to your hospital administrator. Dr. Elizabeth Martinez has been briefed and will assist with the surgery under your direction. She has temporary clearance for this operation only." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. Dr. Martinez was the surgeon she had mentioned to Mrs. Patterson, one of the few doctors at St. Mary's whose skills she truly respected. Having her assistance would make the complex procedure significantly more manageable. Time frame for extraction? The patient must be stable for transport within 6 hours. A specialized medical team will arrive to take custody once the immediate surgical intervention is complete. Sarah grabbed her emergency bag and headed for the door. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. As she drove through the empty streets toward the hospital, Sarah felt the familiar transformation beginning to take place. The quiet, unremarkable nurse that her colleagues knew was retreating, replaced by the person she had been during her military service, someone who could remain calm while performing surgery under enemy fire, who could make life or death decisions with incomplete information, who could save lives that others couldn't save because they didn't have the training or the clearance to even attempt it. When she arrived at St. Mary's, the parking lot was unusually active for 4 a.m. Several unmarked vehicles were positioned near the emergency entrance, and she could see men in civilian clothes who moved with the unmistakable bearing of military personnel trying to blend in. As she approached the hospital entrance, one of them intercepted her. "Ms. Chen?" "Agent Martinez, FBI Medical Liaison. We've been expecting you." Sarah noted the name similarity and wondered if it was coincidental or if someone had a sense of humor about cover identities. "Status of the patient?" "ETA 3 minutes. The team medic has managed to stabilize vital signs, but the patient lost consciousness approximately 20 minutes ago. Blood pressure is dropping despite fluid replacement, and there are signs of internal bleeding that may be related to the foreign objects." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of helicopter rotors began to echo through the pre-dawn sky. Sarah looked up and saw the aircraft approaching, not a standard medical helicopter, but a military transport configured for medical evacuation. The kind of aircraft that could appear on civilian radar as a routine medical flight while carrying equipment and personnel that officially didn't exist. Dr. Martinez appeared at Sarah's side, looking slightly confused but alert. "Sarah? I got a call 20 minutes ago about a federal medical emergency requiring my assistance. They said you would be leading the surgical team?" Before Sarah could respond, the helicopter touched down in the hospital's emergency landing zone. The rear doors opened immediately, and a team of medics began unloading a patient secured to a specialized stretcher. Even from a distance, Sarah could see that this was no ordinary trauma case. The patient was surrounded by medical equipment she recognized from her military service, portable life support systems designed for battlefield conditions, monitoring devices that could function even if conventional power was disrupted. As the medical team approached, Sarah got her first clear look at the patient and felt her breath catch in her throat. Even unconscious and badly injured, she recognized him immediately. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, one of the most decorated Navy SEALs currently in active service, a man whose operations were so classified that officially he didn't exist. She had worked with his team twice during her military service, and both times the missions had been successful precisely because of their ability to function under impossible circumstances. But what made her heart race wasn't recognition, it was the sophisticated medical monitoring equipment that surrounded him and the fact that every readout was trending in the wrong direction. This wasn't just a routine extraction. This was a situation where failure would mean losing someone whose knowledge and experience were irreplaceable. "Sarah," Dr. Martinez said quietly, "what exactly are we dealing with here?" Sarah looked at her colleague, knowing that the next words she spoke would change everything about their professional relationship and about how everyone at St. Mary's saw her. The quiet nurse who never spoke up was about to take charge of a surgical procedure that would test every skill she possessed, and she was going to have to do it in front of people who had spent 3 years questioning her competence. "We're dealing with a patient who has experimental surveillance technology surgically implanted in his torso," she said, her voice taking on the clear, authoritative tone that had once commanded operating rooms in combat zones. "The devices are designed to self-destruct if improperly removed, which means we have one chance to get this right. Dr. Martinez, I need you to trust me completely and follow my lead without question. Lives depend on our success, more lives than just our patients." Dr. Martinez stared at her for a moment, clearly processing the dramatic change in Sarah's demeanor. Then, she nodded. "What do you need?" As the medical team reached them, Sarah stepped forward to receive the patient handoff, and, for the first time in 3 years, she allowed her military training to take complete control. The transformation was visible, her posture straightened, her movements became more precise, and her voice carried an authority that made everyone around her automatically defer to her leadership. "I need operating room 3 prepared for immediate surgery," she directed the nearest nurse, who happened to be Janet, the young woman who had often commented on Sarah's antisocial behavior. "Full surgical team, but only personnel with level 7 security clearance. I need portable X-ray and ultrasound units that can interface with specialized monitoring equipment. And I need the room sealed, no one in or out without my authorization." Janet stared at her open-mouthed, clearly struggling to reconcile this version of Sarah with the quiet woman she thought she knew. But the authority in Sarah's voice was unmistakable, and she hurried to follow the instructions. As they moved the patient toward the elevator, Sarah began her assessment. The SEAL's vital signs were concerning but stable enough for surgery. The real challenge would be locating and safely removing the surveillance devices without triggering their self-destruct mechanisms. She had performed similar procedures twice before, but never under such time pressure and never with the stakes this high. Dr. Martinez fell into step beside her. "Sarah, I don't know what's happening here, but I can see that you're not who I thought you were." Sarah glanced at her as they entered the elevator. "Dr. Martinez, for the next few hours, forget everything you think you know about me. Focus on the surgery. I'll explain what I can after we save his life." As the elevator doors closed, Sarah caught a glimpse of Linda Morrison and several other day-shift nurses staring at them from the hallway. The looks on their faces told her that word about her dramatic transformation was already beginning to spread through the hospital. By the time this operation was over, the quiet nurse they thought they knew would be gone forever, replaced by someone they were just beginning to understand existed. The elevator climbed toward the surgical floor, and, with each passing moment, Sarah felt herself becoming more fully the person she had been during her military service. The person who could save lives that others couldn't save, who could make impossible decisions under extreme pressure, who could transform from invisible to indispensable in the space of a heartbeat. But she also knew that once this operation was over, there would be no going back to the anonymity she had carefully constructed. The secret she had protected for 3 years was about to be exposed, and everyone at St. Mary's General Hospital was about to discover that the nurse they had overlooked and underestimated was someone far more capable and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The surgical suite hummed with tension as Sarah scrubbed in, her movements precise and methodical. Through the observation window, she could see Lieutenant Commander Webb on the table, surrounded by medical equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Dr. Martinez was completing her own surgical prep, stealing glances at Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and growing respect. "Patient prep complete," announced Dr. James Rodriguez, the anesthesiologist who had been hastily summoned for the emergency surgery. He was one of the few staff members with the security clearance necessary to participate in the operation. "However, I'm seeing some unusual readings on his blood chemistry. There appear to be trace amounts of compounds I don't recognize." Sarah entered the operating room, her mind already shifting into the focused state that had made her one of the most effective combat medics in Navy Special Operations. The patient was exposed to experimental pharmaceutical agents designed to enhance performance and pain tolerance. The compounds are wearing off, which is why his vital signs are becoming unstable. We need to begin extraction immediately. She approached the operating table, where Lieutenant Commander Webb lay unconscious beneath the bright surgical lights. Even injured and sedated, he maintained the lean, muscular build of someone who lived at the peak of physical conditioning. More importantly, Sarah could see the subtle signs that marked him as one of the most elite warriors in the military: old scars from previous operations, calluses that spoke of constant weapons training, and a stillness even in unconsciousness that came from learning to control every aspect of his physical presence. "Dr. Martinez," Sarah said, her voice taking on the clinical authority that her colleagues at St. Mary's had never heard before, "I need you to make the initial incision along the lower left quadrant of the abdomen, approximately 6 inches lateral from the existing scar tissue. The primary device is located near the liver, but we need to approach it carefully to avoid triggering proximity sensors." Dr. Martinez nodded, making the incision with the precision that had earned her reputation as one of the region's best trauma surgeons. As the surgical site was exposed, she paused, her eyebrows rising slightly at what she saw. "Sarah, there's something here I've never encountered before. The tissue around this area has been modified somehow. It looks almost like it's been reinforced with synthetic materials." Sarah moved closer, studying the surgical site with practiced eyes. What Dr. Martinez was seeing was the result of advanced military medical enhancement, a procedure that strengthened tissue around implant sites to prevent accidental damage during combat operations. It was technology that officially didn't exist, developed in classified laboratories for use by special operations personnel who operated in environments where conventional medical support wasn't available. The patient received experimental tissue reinforcement as part of his mission preparation, Sarah explained, taking control of the procedure. The synthetic materials are designed to integrate with natural tissue, but they complicate removal of the implanted devices. "I need you to follow my lead exactly. Any deviation from proper protocol could trigger the self-destruct mechanism." As Sarah began the delicate process of locating the first surveillance device, the operating room door opened and Agent Martinez from the FBI stepped inside, now wearing surgical scrubs but maintaining his watchful demeanor. "Status report," he said quietly, positioning himself where he could observe the procedure without interfering. "Primary device located," Sarah replied, her hands steady as she worked. "Beginning extraction sequence. Dr. Martinez, I need you to maintain tissue separation while I disconnect the neural interface connections." Dr. Martinez followed Sarah's instructions precisely, but her expression showed growing amazement at the complexity of what they were dealing with. "Sarah, this technology is unlike anything I've seen in civilian medicine. How do you know the proper extraction protocols?" Sarah paused for a moment, meeting Dr. Martinez's eyes across the operating table. "Because I helped develop them. During my military service, I was part of a classified medical unit that specialized in advanced trauma surgery for special operations personnel. This isn't the first time I've performed this procedure." The admission hung in the air like a revelation. Dr. Martinez had worked with Sarah for 3 years, had watched her perform routine nursing duties with competent efficiency, had never suspected that the quiet woman possessed surgical skills that surpassed her own. But now, watching Sarah work with instruments and techniques she had never seen before, the truth was undeniable. "First device removed successfully," Sarah announced, carefully placing the small, complex piece of technology in a specialized containment unit that Agent Martinez had provided. "Beginning location of secondary device. This one is more complex, it's integrated with the patient's autonomic nervous system." As she worked, Sarah became aware of voices outside the operating room. Through the intercom system, she could hear the sounds of her colleagues gathering in the hallway, drawn by rumors of the mysterious emergency surgery taking place behind closed doors. Linda Morrison's voice was clearly audible, expressing skepticism about Sarah's sudden elevation to surgical leadership. "I don't care what kind of federal emergency this is supposed to be," Linda was saying. "Sarah Chen is a floor nurse, not a surgeon. Someone needs to explain why she's been put in charge of a critical operation." Dr. Rodriguez glanced toward the observation window, where several staff members had gathered to watch the unprecedented procedure. "Should we be concerned about the attention this is drawing?" he asked quietly. Sarah continued her work without looking up. "Let them watch. After today, there won't be any point in maintaining the facade anyway." As she spoke, her hands located the second surveillance device, embedded much more deeply than the first. This one was connected to neural pathways that monitored the patient's vital functions and could theoretically access his memories and thoughts. Removing it would require a level of precision that few surgeons in the world could achieve. "Dr. Martinez, I need you to maintain blood flow to the hepatic artery while I disconnect the neural interfaces. This device has backup power that could trigger the self-destruct if it detects any attempt to disable its primary functions." Working with tools that looked more like precision electronics equipment than traditional surgical instruments, Sarah began the painstaking process of severing the connections between the surveillance device and Lieutenant Commander Webb's nervous system. Each movement had to be exact. A millimeter's error could either damage vital neural pathways or trigger the explosive mechanism designed to destroy evidence of the technology. Heart rate increasing, Dr. Rodriguez reported. Blood pressure dropping. The anesthetic isn't maintaining the same effectiveness it should. Expected response, Sarah replied calmly. The patient's enhanced physiology processes sedatives differently than normal. Increase the dosage by 20%, but be prepared to counteract respiratory depression if his breathing becomes compromised. As the extraction continued, Sarah was dimly aware of more people gathering in the hallway outside the operating room. Word of the mysterious surgery had spread throughout the hospital, and staff members from multiple departments were trying to understand what was happening. But her focus remained entirely on the delicate work before her. "Neural connections severed," she announced. "Beginning mechanical extraction of the device housing." This was the most dangerous part of the procedure. The surveillance device was designed to self-destruct if it detected tampering, and removing it required disabling multiple safeguards in a specific sequence. Sarah had practiced this procedure countless times during her military service, but never under such public scrutiny and never with the knowledge that failure would not only kill her patient but expose classified technology to civilian medical personnel. "Device destabilizing," Agent Martinez warned, monitoring readings from specialized equipment. "You have approximately 90 seconds before automatic destruction sequence initiates." Sarah's hands moved with mechanical precision, disconnecting power sources and neutralizing security protocols with the calm efficiency of someone who had performed this procedure under enemy fire. Around her, the operating room was silent except for the steady beeping of monitoring equipment and the barely audible sound of her own controlled breathing. 60 seconds, Agent Martinez announced. "Almost there," Sarah replied, her voice betraying no hint of the intense pressure she was operating under. This was what she had been trained for, moments when lives hung in the balance and there was no room for error, no second chances, no opportunity to hesitate or doubt. 30 seconds. Sarah made the final disconnection, carefully lifting the surveillance device from Lieutenant Commander Webb's body and placing it in the containment unit. Immediately, the threat indicators on Agent Martinez's equipment went dark. "Device successfully extracted," she announced, finally, allowing herself to breathe normally. "Patient is stable. Beginning closure procedures." As Dr. Martinez assisted with suturing the surgical site, she shook her head in amazement. "Sarah, what I just witnessed, that level of surgical precision under that kind of pressure, where did you learn to do this?" Before Sarah could answer, the operating room doors opened and Dr. Elizabeth Thompson, the hospital's chief administrator, entered with Linda Morrison and 2 other senior staff members. Their expressions ranged from confusion to barely concealed anger. "Miss Chen," Dr. Thompson said, her voice tight with controlled frustration, "I need an explanation for what's happening here. I received a federal order placing you in charge of this surgery, but, according to our records, you're not qualified to perform complex surgical procedures." Sarah looked up from the patient, meeting Dr. Thompson's gaze directly. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't avoid eye contact or deflect attention away from herself. The authority that had carried her through countless military operations was fully present in her voice when she spoke. "Dr. Thompson, I'm Navy Hospital Corpsman Sarah Chen, formerly attached to Naval Special Warfare Command Medical Unit 7. I hold advanced certifications in trauma surgery, battlefield medicine, and specialized extraction procedures for classified medical implants. I've performed emergency surgery under combat conditions, trained some of the most elite medics in military special operations, and developed protocols for medical procedures that officially don't exist. The silence in the operating room was complete. Dr. Thompson, Linda Morrison, and the other staff members stared at her with expressions of shock and disbelief. The quiet, unremarkable nurse they thought they knew had just revealed herself to be someone entirely different, someone whose qualifications surpassed those of most of the hospital's senior medical staff. The patient is Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, United States Navy SEALs, Sarah continued. He was injured during a classified operation and required immediate extraction of enemy surveillance technology. I was called in because I'm one of only 12 people in the country qualified to perform this procedure safely. Linda Morrison found her voice first. You're telling us that for 3 years, you've been working as a floor nurse when you're actually a military surgeon? Sarah finished the final suture and stepped back from the operating table. I'm telling you that my military service ended 3 years ago, and I chose to work here as a regular nurse because I wanted a life that didn't involve life or death decisions every day. Today, that choice was taken away from me. As the immediate medical crisis passed, Sarah realized that everything about her life at St. Mary's General Hospital had just changed permanently. The careful anonymity she had constructed was gone, destroyed by circumstances that forced her to reveal skills she had hoped never to use again. But, as she looked down at Lieutenant Commander Webb's stabilized vital signs, she knew she had made the right choice. Now came the hard part, explaining to her colleagues why she had hidden her true capabilities for 3 years, and deciding what kind of life she wanted to build now that her secret was exposed. The recovery room was quieter than the operating theater, but Sarah could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching her every move as she monitored Lieutenant Commander Webb's post-surgical status. Through the glass partition, she could see clusters of hospital staff gathered in the hallway, their conversations animated with the kind of excitement that comes from witnessing something that challenges everything they thought they knew. Dr. Martinez sat in the chair beside Webb's bed, studying the surgical charts with fascination. Sarah, I've been practicing surgery for 15 years, and I've never seen techniques like what you used in there. Some of those instruments weren't even in our standard surgical inventory. Specialized equipment, Sarah replied, checking the patient's neural response indicators on monitors that the FBI medical team had brought with them. Designed for situations where conventional surgical tools aren't adequate for the specific challenges involved. Agent Martinez approached, his phone buzzing with what Sarah assumed were status updates from his superiors. Miss Chen, the extraction was successful, and preliminary analysis confirms that both devices were safely neutralized before they could transmit any classified information. You've potentially saved not just Lieutenant Commander Webb's life, but an entire operation that took 18 months to plan. Sarah nodded but didn't look away from her patient. Webb's vital signs were stabilizing, but recovery from this type of procedure was complicated by the enhanced physiology that made him such an effective special operations warrior. His body processed medications differently, healed faster than normal, but also responded unpredictably to anesthesia and pain management protocols. How long before he regains consciousness? Dr. Martinez asked. Difficult to predict, Sarah replied. Military enhancement protocols affect neurological recovery in ways that civilian medicine doesn't account for. Could be anywhere from 30 minutes to several hours. Dr. Thompson appeared in the doorway, accompanied by Linda Morrison and Dr. Hayes, the young resident who had often criticized Sarah's patient interaction methods. Their expressions suggested a mixture of professional curiosity and personal bewilderment. Ms. Chen, Dr. Thompson began, I think we need to have a comprehensive discussion about your background and qualifications. Our personnel files indicate that you completed your nursing degree at State University and had no prior medical experience before joining our staff. Sarah finally looked up from the monitors. That information is correct. I completed nursing school after my military discharge. My previous medical training was classified and couldn't be included in civilian employment records. Classified how? Linda Morrison interjected. I've never heard of medical training being classified. Doctors and nurses in the military use the same basic procedures as civilian medical personnel. Not all military medical personnel work in conventional hospitals, Sarah said carefully. Some work with special operations units that require advanced training in procedures that civilian medical facilities never encounter. That training carries security classifications that prevent it from being discussed in non-secure environments. Dr. Hayes stepped forward, his expression showing the kind of intellectual challenge that comes from having fundamental assumptions proven wrong. Are you saying that there are medical procedures that the military knows about that civilian hospitals don't? Before Sarah could respond, Lieutenant Commander Webb's eyes opened. His gaze was immediately alert and focused, moving systematically around the room to assess his situation before settling on Sarah's face. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse but clear. "Dove. Didn't expect to see you again." Sarah felt everyone in the room turn to look at her, their expressions full of questions she wasn't sure she could answer. Webb was using her military call sign, confirming to everyone present that their previous assessment of her background had been incomplete in ways they were just beginning to understand. "Commander Webb. How are you feeling?" "Like someone removed my internal organs with an ice cream scoop," he replied with the kind of dark humor that was common among military personnel who had survived multiple combat deployments. But alive, which wasn't looking likely a few hours ago. Agent Martinez moved closer to the bed. "Commander, can you provide a status report on the mission parameters that led to your current situation?" Webb's eyes shifted to the other people in the room, Dr. Thompson, Linda Morrison, Dr. Hayes, and Dr. Martinez, clearly assessing how much information could be shared in front of civilian personnel. The devices were successfully implanted during the operation, but the extraction timeline was compromised when enemy forces detected our presence earlier than anticipated. The surveillance technology functioned as designed, but removal became necessary when enemy countermeasures threatened to trigger automatic termination protocols. Sarah translated for the benefit of her civilian colleagues. "He's saying the mission was successful, but they had to abort early because the enemy discovered what they were doing. The surveillance devices worked, but they had to be removed quickly before the enemy could trigger their self-destruct mechanisms remotely." Dr. Martinez raised her hand like a student in a lecture hall. "I'm sorry, but I'm still trying to understand the basic situation here. You're telling us that surveillance devices were surgically implanted in this man as part of a military operation?" "Advanced reconnaissance requires advanced methods," Webb replied. "Sometimes the best way to gather intelligence is from the inside." Linda Morrison looked between Sarah and Webb with growing comprehension. "You two know each other from the military." "We've worked together before," Sarah confirmed. "Commander Webb's unit occasionally required specialized medical support that standard military medical personnel couldn't provide." "Occasionally?" Webb said with a slight smile. "Dove here saved my life twice in Afghanistan and once in Syria. Her surgical skills under combat conditions are legendary among special operations medical personnel." The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Sarah watched as her colleagues processed the fact that the quiet nurse they had worked with for 3 years was not only a highly trained military medic, but someone whose skills were respected by elite special operations warriors. Dr. Thompson found her voice first. "Sarah, why didn't you tell us about your background when you applied for the position here?" Sarah looked at her supervisor, considering how much of the truth she could share. "Because I came here to get away from that life. Military special operations medicine isn't something you can easily leave behind if people know you're capable of it. There are always situations that require those skills, always emergencies where you become the only person who can help. I wanted to work in an environment where I could help people without having to make life or death decisions under extreme pressure." "But you've been underutilizing your skills for 3 years, Dr. Hayes said, his tone suggesting professional frustration. "You could have been performing complex surgeries, training other medical personnel, advancing your career instead of working as a floor nurse." "Career advancement wasn't the goal," Sarah replied. "Peace of mind was the goal. Working as a floor nurse allowed me to help people without the constant pressure of knowing that someone's life depended entirely on my ability to perform perfectly under impossible circumstances." Webb struggled to sit up slightly, his movement careful but determined. That's why she was the best combat medic I ever worked with. She understood that the technical skills were only part of the job. The mental discipline to function under extreme stress, to make complex decisions with incomplete information, to save lives when failure meant catastrophic consequences, that's what separated her from everyone else. Agent Martinez's phone buzzed again, and, after reading the message, he approached Sarah. Ms. Chen, I have instructions to offer you reactivation to your previous military medical unit. The success of today's operation, combined with your demonstrated ability to maintain operational security for 3 years, makes you an ideal candidate for expanded responsibilities in Special Operations Medical Support. The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah looked around the room at her civilian colleagues, people who had spent 3 years thinking they knew her, who were now discovering that the quiet nurse they had overlooked possessed capabilities that few people in the world could match. "What about my position here?" she asked. Dr. Thompson stepped forward. "Sarah, given what we've learned about your qualifications today, I think we need to discuss restructuring your role at St. Mary's. Your skills are far too valuable to be limited to floor nursing duties. We could create a position in emergency trauma surgery, or develop a specialized program for treating patients with complex medical implants." Or, Webb said from his hospital bed, "you could come back where your skills can make the biggest difference." Special Operations medical units need people who can do what you did today. There aren't many people in the world who can perform surgery under combat conditions while maintaining the security protocols necessary to protect classified operations. Sarah realized that everyone in the room was waiting for her decision. The quiet life she had built at St. Mary's was gone, destroyed by circumstances that forced her to reveal capabilities she had hoped never to use again. But, now she had to decide what kind of life she wanted to build with those capabilities exposed. Dr. Martinez spoke up unexpectedly. "Sarah, whatever you decide, I want you to know that working with you today was an honor. I've learned more about advanced surgical techniques in the past few hours than in the previous year of my career. If you stay at St. Mary's, I'd like to request that we work together regularly." Linda Morrison nodded in agreement. "I owe you an apology. I've spent 3 years thinking you were antisocial and uninterested in developing your nursing skills. I never imagined that you were actually overqualified for everything we were asking you to do." Sarah looked at Lieutenant Commander Webb, whose life she had just saved using skills that few people possessed. Then, she looked at her civilian colleagues, who were seeing her clearly for the first time. The choice before her wasn't just about career advancement or professional fulfillment, it was about what kind of person she wanted to be and what kind of contribution she wanted to make to the world. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Commander Webb needs monitoring for the next 24 hours to ensure there are no complications from the extraction. After he's stable for transport, I'll make my decision about what comes next." Agent Martinez nodded. "Understood. The offer remains open, and there's no pressure for an immediate decision." As the crowd in the room began to disperse, Sarah remained beside Webb's bed, monitoring his recovery and contemplating a future that suddenly held possibilities she had never expected to consider again. The quiet nurse that St. Mary's General Hospital had known was gone forever, but who would take her place remained to be determined. Outside the recovery room, she could see her colleagues continuing their animated discussions about the day's revelations. Tomorrow, word would spread throughout the hospital about what had happened, and Sarah Chen would no longer be the invisible nurse that everyone overlooked. But whether the change would lead to a return to military service or a new role in civilian medicine remained to be decided. The transformation was complete, but the story was far from over. 24 hours later, Sarah stood in the same recovery room, watching as Lieutenant Commander Webb prepared for transport to a classified medical facility where his recovery would continue under military supervision. His vital signs had stabilized completely, and the extraction sites were healing with the accelerated recovery rate that his enhanced physiology provided. "You saved my life," Webb said as Sarah completed her final assessment. "But, more than that, you saved an operation that took 18 months to plan and could prevent a significant terrorist attack. The intelligence we gathered before the extraction became necessary will save thousands of civilian lives." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of his words. This was why her military medical skills were so valuable, not just because they could save individual lives, but because those lives often carried information or capabilities that affected much larger populations. It was a responsibility she had tried to leave behind, but one that circumstances had forced her to confront again. "What will you tell your team about what happened here?" she asked. "The truth. That hospital corpsman Sarah Chen performed emergency extraction surgery under civilian conditions with the same precision and professionalism that made her legendary during her active duty service." Agent Martinez approached with a tablet containing what appeared to be official documents. "Miss Chen, I have your reactivation papers ready for signature if you've decided to return to military medical service. The position offers significant advancement opportunities and the chance to work with the most advanced medical technology in the world." Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Thompson appeared in the doorway with Dr. Martinez and Linda Morrison. Their expressions suggested they had been discussing something important. "Sarah," Dr. Thompson began, "we've been reviewing your options for continued employment at St. Mary's, and we'd like to present an alternative to military reactivation. Given your demonstrated capabilities, we're prepared to offer you a position as Chief of Emergency Trauma Surgery, with full authority to develop specialized programs for treating complex cases that other hospitals can't handle." Dr. Martinez stepped forward. The position would include research opportunities, training responsibilities for other medical personnel, and access to equipment and resources that would allow you to use your advanced skills in a civilian setting. You'd be able to help people without the security restrictions and combat pressures of military service. Sarah looked between the military offer and the civilian opportunity, realizing that both represented significant changes from the quiet life she had built over the past 3 years. But they also represented two different philosophies about how to use the capabilities she possessed. Linda Morrison surprised everyone by speaking up. "Sarah, I want to apologize for the way I've treated you over the past 3 years. I realize now that I was intimidated by your competence and professionalism, and I interpreted your silence as lack of engagement rather than understanding it for what it was, the discipline of someone who had learned when to speak and when to listen. We all underestimated you," Dr. Hayes added, appearing behind the group. "But now that we understand your background, we'd like the opportunity to learn from your experience and to support whatever decision you make about your future." Webb shifted in his bed to face Sarah directly. "Dove, whatever you decide, remember that the skills you possess aren't just technical abilities, they're a form of service. Whether you use them in military operations or civilian medicine, you'll be saving lives that other people can't save. The question is which environment allows you to make the biggest difference." Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the hospital grounds, where life continued with the routine normalcy that she had found so appealing 3 years ago. But she understood now that normalcy had been an illusion, built on hiding essential parts of who she was and what she was capable of contributing. "Dr. Thompson," she said finally, "the position you're offering, would it include the authority to develop protocols for treating patients with classified medical implants or combat-related injuries that require specialized knowledge?" "Absolutely. We recognize that your military experience gives you capabilities that could benefit a wide range of patients, including veterans who might otherwise have to seek treatment at distant military medical facilities." Sarah turned to Agent Martinez. "And the military position, would it involve regular deployment to combat zones, or would it be primarily based at secure medical facilities in the United States?" "The position is primarily consultative and training-based, with deployment only when your specific skills are required for operations that can't be handled by standard military medical personnel. You'd have significant input into when and how your capabilities are utilized." As Sarah weighed her options, she realized that the real decision wasn't between civilian and military service, it was between different ways of serving people who needed help that only she could provide. The quiet nurse that her colleagues had known was gone, but the person who would replace her could choose how to use her abilities to make the greatest positive impact. "I've made my decision," she announced, turning back to face the group that had gathered in the recovery room. "Dr. Thompson, I accept the position as Chief of Emergency Trauma Surgery, with one modification. I want to establish a consultation program with military medical facilities, so that veterans and active duty personnel can access specialized trauma care without having to travel to distant military hospitals. Agent Martinez raised an eyebrow. That would require maintaining your security clearance and establishing protocols for handling classified medical cases in a civilian facility. Which is possible, Dr. Thompson said, clearly energized by the prospect. We could create a secure wing specifically for cases that require security protocols, staffed by personnel with appropriate clearances. Webb smiled from his hospital bed. Dove, you're trying to have the best of both worlds, civilian medicine with the ability to handle military cases when needed. I'm trying to find a way to use my skills to help the most people possible without having to choose between the civilian patients who need advanced trauma care and the military personnel who need specialized medical support, Sarah replied. Both populations deserve access to the best possible medical care, and artificial barriers between military and civilian medicine shouldn't prevent that. Dr. Martinez stepped forward with obvious enthusiasm. Sarah, if you're serious about this, I'd like to be part of the program. What I learned working with you yesterday opened my eyes to techniques and approaches that could revolutionize how we treat complex trauma cases. Linda Morrison nodded in agreement. The nursing staff would support the program as well. We've all learned something valuable about not making assumptions about people's capabilities based on limited observations. Agent Martinez consulted his tablet, then looked up with an expression of professional respect. Ms. Chen, your proposal is actually consistent with current Department of Defense initiatives to improve cooperation between military and civilian medical facilities. I believe we can work out the security protocols necessary to make your consultation program operational. Sarah felt a sense of rightness settling over her decision. For 3 years, she had tried to escape the complexity and responsibility of her military medical training by hiding in the anonymity of routine nursing work. But the events of the past day had shown her that hiding her capabilities didn't eliminate the responsibility that came with them, it just meant that people who could benefit from her skills were deprived of that opportunity. There's one more thing, she said, looking around the room at the people who had become her colleagues and would now become her partners in developing a new kind of medical program. I want to establish a training component where civilian medical personnel can learn advanced trauma techniques that are currently limited to military medical units, and where military medics can train in civilian medical facilities to understand how to adapt their skills to non-combat environments. Webb attempted to sit up straighter, wincing slightly at the movement. That kind of cross-training could save lives in both military and civilian contexts. Combat medics often struggle to adapt to civilian medical protocols when they leave military service, and civilian medical personnel sometimes lack the training to handle the kinds of trauma that military veterans present with. Dr. Thompson was already taking notes. Sarah, your proposal goes far beyond what we initially envisioned, but I think it could position St. Mary's as a leader in advanced trauma medicine. How quickly could we begin implementing these programs? Sarah considered the question, her mind automatically shifting into the planning mode that had made her effective in military operations. Initial consultation services could begin within 30 days, once security protocols are established. The training programs would take longer to develop, probably 6 months for full implementation. But we could start with basic cross-training immediately. As the group began discussing the practical details of implementing Sarah's expanded vision, she realized that the transformation that had begun with a phone call at 3:47 a.m. had led to something far more significant than she had anticipated. Instead of simply revealing her hidden capabilities, the crisis had created an opportunity to use those capabilities in new ways that could benefit far more people than either pure military or pure civilian medical service. Lieutenant Commander Webb was discharged 2 hours later, his recovery complete enough for transport to the military facility where his debriefing and further medical monitoring would take place. As the specialized medical team prepared to leave, Webb offered Sarah a final salute. Dove, you found a way to serve that honors both your military training and your desire to help civilian patients. That takes wisdom as well as courage. Sarah returned the salute, then watched as the military transport vehicles disappeared into the afternoon traffic. Around her, St. Mary's General Hospital was returning to its normal rhythm, but she knew that normalcy would never again mean what it had before. Dr. Martinez joined her at the window. Sarah, I have to ask, are you ready for the attention that's going to come with this new position? Word is already spreading about what happened here, and medical journals are going to want to cover our trauma program. Sarah smiled, feeling more at peace with herself than she had in 3 years. Dr. Martinez, I spent 3 years trying to be invisible because I thought that would give me peace. What I've learned is that peace doesn't come from hiding who you are, it comes from finding the right way to be who you are. I'm ready to stop being invisible. As the sun set over St. Mary's General Hospital, Sarah Chin began planning the transformation that would change not just her own career, but the way military and civilian medical facilities cooperated to serve patients who needed the best of both worlds. The quiet nurse that everyone had overlooked was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came not from hiding exceptional capabilities, but from finding the best ways to use them in service of others. The helicopter that had arrived in the early morning darkness was gone, but the changes it had brought to Sarah's life and to St. Mary's Hospital would continue for years to come. Sometimes the most important transformations begin with a single phone call in the middle of the night, and sometimes the people who seem the most ordinary are actually the most extraordinary, they're just waiting for the right moment to reveal who they really are.